Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. In this episode, Peter Watts and Richard Morgan are joining us. These guys are old friends. This was a great conversation, and it was a long one too, so we're actually going to split it into 2 episodes. So watch, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the second part of this conversation come out. We really hope you enjoy this one, because we sure did. Next week is going to be our very first film club episode, where we're talking about Alien from 1979. The book club episodes have been going great for about 3 years now. We hope you enjoy those ones. If you haven't, go back and check them out. We talk about some great books regularly, and now we're going to also start doing some film club episodes, so join us for those. If you have not subscribed or followed or rated the show, please do so. We'd love to get a rating from you. Let us know what you think of the show. Follow us, subscribe, whatever you got to do. We would really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us today. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Today's discussion is special because we've got both Richard Morgan and Peter Watts back on the show. Both authors, of course, need no introduction, but let's do one anyway. Peter Watts is a science fiction author from Toronto, known for his hard sci-fi writing that explores ideas around biology, technology, consciousness, and intelligence. Peter brings his PhD and academic background to bear on his writing in terms of thoughtful and plausible, big ideas that question our assumptions about topics like sentience and intelligence. Our listeners may know him from his Hugo shortlisted novel Blind Sight and the Rifters trilogy. Also with us today is Richard K. Morgan. Richard is the author of Altered Carbon, a 2002 novel that won the Philip K. Dick Award and was made into a multi-season TV series on Netflix. Richard is also the recipient of the Arthur C. Clarke Award for his book 13. Richard has worked on video games and graphic novels for the Marvel Universe. And both Richard and Peter are great guys with fascinating ideas, and we're lucky to have both of you here today.
I wonder how many of our listeners know that you guys are old friends too. So this is pretty cool.
It's interesting. I suppose anyone who tracks either of us probably would have some sense. But
I like to think of it more as a master acolyte relationship than a pure.
In which direction?
No, Peter's the master of actual science. So every now and then,
like I got a fan email from Richard like years and years and years and years ago. And I was aware of him because, he was the asshole who'd written one lousy book and got a 7-figure option for it. So of course he is reviled throughout the field on that basis.
yes.
But I'd never heard from the dude before, and it was amazing. I have some local fans who have also reached out to me, and the moment I mentioned that I'd gotten this email from Richard Morgan, it was like, Peter who? Tell us more about this email, Richard Morgan. So yeah, from that point on, we started off, and then we ended up.
Well, it's quite cool, wasn't it? Because I think
fighting for a role in a computer game in Germany, and like without even knowing that we were being pitted together in some kind of arena death match. It was.
Yeah. No, I think that was great actually, because I think I remember we were talking, and I said, oh, I sent you I bigged up your book, and you went back. You went, oh, hang on, let me look. Oh man, yeah, you sent me that, didn't you? And so yeah, that. But it was great because the Crytek were sort of unbeknownst to either of us. They had got both of us to write a pitch, and I didn't know anything about this. And suddenly Peter just sends me an email, and he goes, "I don't know if you realize this, but you and I are being asked to pitch against each other here." And and he says something like, "And I guess it's probably not in my best interest to be actually getting in touch with you and telling you this, but hey, I was raised by Baptists." And I'm
So
like,
this was a pitch to work on a German video game?
this was to work on Crisis 2.
It wasn't. I don't know how actually pernicious it was. I think what happened, somebody on the factory floor, and maybe Richard will back this up in terms of my general experience with video games, because I'm working on a couple of them now, in fact. And my general experience of video games is that people on the factory floor are absolutely awesome. They have a wide range of backgrounds in a whole shitload of different fields. They're intrigued, they're enthused, they really want to make a good job. And then up here, you've got the dead-eyed suits with marbles for eyeballs. And those are the ones who will, after everybody else on the team has been let go, send you an email thanking you for all your great work and telling you that they will be in touch when they need to talk to you again. And I think what happened in this case was somebody on the factory floor liked my stuff and reached out to me without knowing that somebody further up, because Richard had a much huger reputation.
I already had a relationship with Electronic Arts, and Electronic Arts were bankrolling Crytek at the time for this game. They were providing the sort of funding plus consultancy, and so I got pitched in as, we'd like this guy to have a look. Meanwhile, yeah, as Peter said, I don't remember who it was. There was a guy there. I think he left shortly after, actually. But he was either the creative director or someone close to that, and he was a big fan of Peter's work, and you could in fact see it in some of the things he was pitching for the game. And and so it sort of collided at an angle, and it was just one of those. It could have been really awkward, but I'd say Peter was brilliant. He aced it with that email, and I'm like, whoa, okay. So I just wrote back to Crytek and said, look, guys, it's come to my attention that this is going on, and this is not on. I'm quite happy to work with Peter. I'm a big fan of his work. So if the two of us could work together, but you've got to start making some decisions. And I don't know what happened in the end, but I ended up with the gig of lead writer. But then Peter came aboard to write the novelization, which went on to. Did it win an award in the end? It was certainly.
It was nominated for something. It was nominated. I didn't know they had awards for video game novelizations. That seems pretty niche.
Well, I think also the fact that no one had ever seen a video game novelization like this, because they usually are by the numbers. They're like the sort of Predator tie-in novels or whatever. It's pretty much painted by numbers. And Peter hadn't done that. Peter had written this like excoriating stream of consciousness first person thing. And it was I think people look at it and go, what the fuck is this? This is nothing like any video game tie-in I've ever read. It was brilliant. And luckily we got it in under the gate, because Peter turned it in, and then it was handed on to management within Crytek, and they didn't really like it. They didn't. I mean, that I don't think they disliked it. They thought it didn't gel very well with the tone of what they wanted to do with the game and everything. But it was too late, because Peter was like, well, I can't rewrite the bloody thing. I've got things in line, and with typical sort of video game obliviousness, they were like, well, can't you just, reiterate it? And I remember the guy said to me, one of the senior guy, he turned around to me in a meeting, and I don't think you weren't there, Peter. I think he said, I don't understand this. I mean, we can turn around a whole new iteration of the game in 24 hours. And I'm like, yeah, but that's code. That's not, this is.
It also generally turns out to be crap. I mean, look at Homeworld.
Well, I'm going to say iterating is all well and good, but I say he couldn't wrap his head around the idea that, like, no, this is like 3 months work, and you can't just unbind it and go back again. So it came out entire, and I say it was so far away from what the standard run of those is, that I think everybody blinked and sat up and took notice. It was really awesome. It was.
I mean, I did. First point. I mean, I didn't really have any business in that competition in the first place. Richard was the one with the record. He had the established track record. He had a professional relationship with the higher ups. It was basically some peon who liked my stuff, who even got me involved. And so the fact that I even got to do the novelization was kind of more than you would expect the gods to bestow. And when
you had a lot of fans in Crytek as well. I think. I mean, not just there were people who liked your stuff. That was the guy who sort of pitched you in the first place. But there were people within Crytek who met you and really liked you, and that was the other thing. It was like there was a sense of wanting you to be involved. And I was very keen for you to be involved anyway, because there were a lot of really cool ideas, and Peter generates these really scary sort of Lovecraftian body horror type outlooks. And we, at the time, the game was supposed to have this plague in it, and there were all sorts of other things that it ended up not being in the game, really. But and so I was like, we really, this guy's got the goods. We need this. And I say it's just one of those things. Like, the problem is it was a different time, because back then video games was just on the brink of becoming huge, really huge. Back then, if you weren't a gamer, it was still a slightly esoteric sort of, oh, video games, yeah, that's the sort of, plink plink thing.
They were still making 3 or 4 times what Hollywood was bringing.
I mean, they were making a lot of money, but it was still under wraps. It was still kind of, I think San Andreas was out by then, so but it hadn't yet broken. It broke around the same time because that was when Modern Warfare Call of Duty kind of broke all the records for box office for launch. And at the time, so they had all this money, not a lot of rep, and people were basically, they were just sort of going, oh, I really like books by this guy. Maybe we could hire him in. And that, I mean, to be fair, Peter talks about, track record and all profile, but my profile was largely the same as Peter's, except I got hauled in a little while sooner, and I've been hauled in by Electronic Arts. They got me in to look at another game, a different one, and then because they liked the work I'd done on that, they then pitched me towards Crytek as well. But it was a time when literally they would just go, oh yeah, I really like this guy. Okay, well, let's get him in and we'll pay him some money and get him to write us something, and we'll see if we want it or not. And I think that went on for about 5 years, and then there was a crunch. Would have been about 2012, maybe something like that. It was a long time after the general credit crunch. The video game industry walked through that without a blink, but there was a sort of knock-on effect. And then suddenly, I think people, they were looking around, they're going, well, hang on, we're paying this guy lots of money, but we've got staff writers, we have guys on staff who do this. Well, what the fuck is this? And so then it became a lot less easy to get the gigs, and people were less inclined to throw large amounts of money at you. But it was a fun time. I mean, it was a very frustrating time as well, because it was real Wild West standards, and there were, in video gaming, there weren't really any templates about how things should be done. It's like in the movie industry, there is a template. A script has to look a certain way. It ticks a certain number of boxes. Everybody knows what a script is. Even people who couldn't, pick the sense out one if their life depended on it, they know what the box ticks are, and it's become very solidified. And video games wasn't like that. Video games was more like, I guess, what Hollywood was like in the 20s or something.
I would respectfully disagree with that.
Was it still like?
and in fact, it goes back to your welcome praise for the novelization. In fact, they were expecting me to do, like you say, a tie-in novel, something set in the same universe, but not just basically a rehash of the game. And I told them out at the outset, because I had something like 3 months to do it, and they kept changing the damn plot.
Yeah, I know.
Writing, right? And I kept telling them that no, if I was going to do this, I coming up with an entirely new plot was not in the cards, given the other stuff I had on my plate. I would just have to do a novelization of the game. And the game has tropes, and they were baked in. There is the super powered alien who basically crosses the galaxy the way you and I cross the street. And yet, a couple of intrepid SEALs with a Chinook helicopter can take it down with a couple of surface-to-air missiles.
Yeah.
There are tropes that are necessary for every game to not be Bambi meets Godzilla. But they're dumb tropes outside of the game. They're essential to fun gameplay, but they're really vulnerable to fridge logic. So all I did was, and the great thing about a first-person shooter is that the first person, as the protagonist, has no personality whatsoever. Because
not even a voice.
The vessel into which the player pours themselves. You're supposed to identify as the character. So that left me with this Alcatraz-shaped hole that I could fill with any personality I liked. And I could use it to address the elements of video games that are essential for good gameplay, but make no fucking sense in the real world. So it was, I mean, people wonder when I say this, and I've actually had people say, so why did you lower yourself to writing a video game? and the first thing was, when you're a middle-aged science fiction writer, you don't say no to any kind of blowjob you're expected to give, no matter how disgusting. But B, I remain unreasonably proud of that game, because working with somebody else's story and working within the video game format, I was essentially forced to write with like one hand tied behind my back.
Yeah, a lot constraint.
And what resulted was not great literature, but it's kind of like, you know, a dog that can read. You don't complain because he moves his lips. You're just really impressed that he can read. And so I used Richard's script as a method of interrogating the tropes themselves, having Alcatraz say, wait a minute, this makes no sense, and then trying to come up with reasons why it would.
Yeah.
And there were things that didn't make it into the the final script. At one point, I had Alcatraz talking to his his debriefing interrogator, saying, you know, have you ever been in a situation where like it seems like you're being herded, and like you go down a particular alley, and then when you try and go back, it's like been blocked off with rubble, and it's like you've only got one way to go. And you ever feel, and I got into this weird interrogation of free will and stuff, and my editor at Del Rey just said, no, you're breaking the fourth wall way too much.
Yeah, I remember that note actually. I remember reading the note when I was reading the manuscript, and it says, "No, I'm sorry, Peter. You know, you've completely broken the fourth wall here." You know, we had a very canny editor at Del Rey actually, and he was all over this stuff. He had some strong sense of what would and wouldn't wash. So, but no, it was fun times. It really was. It was very
It may have been funner although you stuck it out and ended up quitting in disgust in the next game, as I recall.
Well, no, I mean, it was a mutual thing. It wasn't, I mean, it's true. I was pretty pissed off with the way things were going because, I mean, that was just, they were personality clash, and they brought in a couple of new people who really were messing it up, in my humble opinion. But it wasn't just that. It was the fact that I'd just become a father, and I was living on the south coast of Spain, and not really wanting to be shuttling backwards and forwards to Germany. And most of what I was doing was putting out fires. I was kind of coming in and having to find, why did they have this meeting and not tell me about it, and why are we doing this? And there were a bunch of things going on at higher level that I wasn't privy to in terms of, you know, what the company was doing and things like that. And I was just getting frozen out. So in the end, I had to sit down with their outreach guy, and just said, look, I think this is not viable anymore. And he agreed. He said, no, obviously not. He said, we can't, you know. So they paid me off quite handsomely, and that was it. I went off to be a father, and you know, left it where it was. But it's it's video games. I mean, it really is the Wild West, and you can't. I was talking to a guy not long ago who was doing really big project for Ubisoft. Can't tell you anything more than that about it, but and he you know, he had been very well received and everything. He was getting, you know, people were very happy and all the rest of it. And then he just got canned from a project because no, you know, things going on in the company didn't suit the way that the masters were organizing things, and that was it. And he was gone like that. And I'd say, unfortunately, it is a bit like that. It's an industry that it's very fluid. And to be fair, that's not just top down. It is an industry in which people constantly up and move. You know, they'll literally go, oh, yeah, I'm bored with living in Europe now. I think I'd quite like to live in Australia for a bit. So that, boom, they're gone, you know. And if you're good, then it's easy to snag jobs. I mean, it's easy to find something. So there is this sort of churn globally, people moving around all over the place. And yeah, it's a very young industry as well. Lots, you know, even the bigwigs, the guys, the company owners, the people. I mean, even the people when I was doing it back in the sort of early 2008 till 12 was the Crytek thing. And even then, the guys who owned EA, the real sort of head honcho guys, they were only, I don't know, 5-6 years older than me. You know, and I was younger then than I am now. So yeah, it was a very young industry, and that's great because there's a dynamism that comes with that, with working with exclusively or almost exclusively young people. But there's also frustration because there's this kind of sense that you're trying to, guys, but can we please focus on what we were doing? No, we're not doing that now. We're doing this other thing over here because it's shinier.
Yeah.
And you'd be constant.
I did some stuff with Capcom, back when Capcom had an outlet in BC,
Oh
and
yeah.
and they flew me out, and I was like, they impressed the hell out of me. Like there was one of the women who was like she was a level designer, but she taught stick fighting at night. Um,
Cool. Yeah.
the engineer had a better background in Shakespeare than anybody I've ever known. They flew me out. They set me down. The first hour they spent was showing me a presentation about the use of distressed fonts as a means of generating an emotional tension. They would show me the pictures of the opening credits for The Walking Dead and Breaking Bad and so on. And they had this thing down to an absolute art.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute honor to work with them. And we came up with this incredibly, like I'd still like to write a novel based on it someday. It was a really great game that could have blown the doors off the industry. And then the upper level, this dynamic young level that you were talking about, Richard, was like, well, the antagonist is pretty well. First of all, you've got your human characters tend to squabble amongst themselves. They're always trying to sabotage each other. They should be more noble. And the
really?
antagonist, it's a little complex, could you like maybe make it a kind of malign yogurt? And every time I called back, there'd be like one fewer person on the team. It's weird. As an outside contractor, you're frequently the last man standing.
Yeah.
Because they purge their inner department before they get rid of the external people. So there's like I felt like a penguin in a Gary Larson cartoon who keeps noticing.
Yeah, exactly. And now Douglas is gone. Something's going on. Yeah.
So that happened, and then all of a sudden, what it turned out was that they brought in a new executive producer from Texas, and his girlfriend had once written a pamphlet on how to monetize Facebook apps. So she was obviously a real writer, and she wanted to do take her shot at this. And that's all she wrote. And the game never came out, and the franchise later imploded. And it's like it no longer exists in Burnaby.
But that is the other problem as well. I say that volatility extends right through the industry, and you can literally entire studios can just go, like you said, like mushrooms, pop. That's quite a common thing. I mean, the other problem also is that it is, games are expensive to make, especially AAA games, and you could sort of carry loss-making games for a while if they're getting good reviews and stuff like that. But yeah, sooner or later, somebody with a modicum of accountancy skills will sit down and go, hang on a minute. And then, boom, it's gone. So it's and I say it's a fascinating industry to work in, but can be, as I say, especially for oldsters like me, you're like, whoa, what? Where's my cheese?
Yeah.
So Peter, you said you're still doing a bit of video game work right now. Richard, you haven't done that in a little while. What else are you guys?
I am. I'm still working with these guys, Gunzilla. They're developing an online shooter, and I still work for them as part of their development directorate.
Wait a minute, Neil's involved in that, isn't he?
Well, no, Neil is. I mean, that's how I came to cross with Neil in the first place, and that's how I came to recommend Blindsight to him, because we were just shooting the shit about good stuff we'd read. He recommended me a couple of writers he'd read, and I recommended you and someone else, and so he's also plugged into that. So that's still ongoing. I'm still a part of that.
Got it. And that was Neil Blomkamp that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Neil's. I mean, it's not his game. We brought him in from outside because basically it was the thing where in the early stages when a lot of very swinging executive decisions were getting made, and one of the things was, right, well, look, we need a visual tone for this. We need a sense of what this world is going to look like. And I think had it been 40 years ago, I would have been trying to get in touch with Ridley Scott, right? Because that was
before Prometheus.
Yeah, well, yeah. Say it's not since then. But I was saying, I think that torch has been passed on, and I'd say that Blomkamp is probably now the director with the closest sort of convincing sense of what the near future might look like. He's if you look at his films, you think, yeah, that actually is pretty compelling, in the same way that Blade Runner was compelling and Alien was compelling at the time, you know. So I got in touch with him, and so he came in, and then he liked the project, got more and more involved in the whole thing, and as I say, he's deeply embedded in it now as well. But no, I mean, it's a Ukrainian company based out of Kiev originally. That was fun and games, obviously, when the war
Yeah.
started.
That'd be tough.
So yeah, but they're still going strong. I mean, they got the guy who runs it, Vlad Korolev, who's the CEO, very, very driven, sort of very entrepreneurial. And yeah, he's driven it through all of these setbacks and things that the company has suffered, and is still there, pushing forward, pushing forward. So, and I
Cool.
say, I'm to be honest with you, I'm having a relatively easy time of it at the moment, because we are in the stage of it's coding now. I mean, with it's running the builds, testing them, making sure things work. It's all of that technical stuff, and there's not much for me to do at this stage until things, you know, kick off.
Yeah. What other writing work are both of you guys up to right now?
Okay, go on, Peter, you go first.
That that implies I have some other writing work going on. I mean, I'm doing a variety of things that keep sort of showing up in non-conventional outlets. Did recently, like, for some reason, I seem to be getting a bit of a rep as an AI guy, and I don't know why. Like, I've got actual colleagues of Jeffrey Hinton and stuff sort of taking me out for beers and saying, "You're kind of nailing AI," and I'm not. I don't have a fucking clue. But
Yeah, but that's nobody has a fucking clue. That's the point, though, isn't it?
that might be it. I might be the only person who admits that.
Yes, you go, look, I don't really know, but it seems to me, which,
So
to be honest,
I've been doing some nonfiction stuff. I did a piece on AI for The Atlantic. I did some stuff on essentially post-collapse recovery with a friend of mine, Dan Brooks, who showed up in the MIT Reader and Nautilus. I wrote a little story called Prompt Injection about AI in the video game industry, but that's showing up in a German cultural collection, right? I'm doing stuff. I am working on a screenplay that is a science fiction allegory for the Black experience in America. And you can tell the high contrast of my camera, notwithstanding that, I am not Black.
no.
But I'm working with a guy who's this huge honking big shot in American Black cultural circles, and he thinks that I do others really well. So I'm doing that. I'm doing the video game stuff. I'm still trying to write my own, I'm working on stuff in the sunflower cycle, the Eriophora, making its jump gates as they crawl around the universe.
And is there a third Blind Sight novel coming as soon as well?
Omniscience, yeah, I know how it's going to end. I have written the first part of it, but the problem with novels and me at this point is that I've only written one novel that was as good as I knew how to make it when I sent it out. And that was my first novel. And the reason it was as good as I knew how to make it was because nobody knew who I was and nobody was expecting it. So I could just work it and work it and work it until I was happy with it and then send it out. There was no deadline. And it, I'm not saying it's my best novel. It has, it was a first novel. It has lots of first novel glitches to it. But I didn't know how to make it any better at that time. Every subsequent novel that I've written has been submitted because it was Tuesday, not because it was ready. And so I'm finally at the, and that even goes for, that goes for Blind Sight, which is the one that everybody loves so much. There are ways I think I could have made it better.
But you always get that, don't you? I mean, I no matter how long I get for a book, I'll turn it in, and within a couple of months, I'm like, shit, I missed that one.
Yeah. What do they say? They say you never finish a book, you only abandon it.
Yes. I think there is some truth in that, definitely. Yeah.
So my take on Omniscience was, I'm not gonna fuck this up. The third book in my Rifters trilogy tanked like a panzer, right? It still hasn't earned out. It's the only one of my books that hasn't earned out. And I don't think it's as sexually horrific and violent as a lot of people say, but it was definitely the weakest of the lot. And I was running on fumes when I made it, and I only wrote that because my agent, said I should go with the proven pattern and stick with the franchise. And I don't want to do that with Omniscience. I don't want to be the guy who writes, the first really, really great novel of the trilogy, a second okay novel of the trilogy, and the third novel making you wish that you had sort of stopped at number one. So I've got the bones of a really good novel, and it's gonna rock, but I haven't pitched it. It's not under contract, and getting back to my roots, it's not going out until it's fucking ready. But the flip side of that, of not having a deadline, is that everything else that does have a deadline gets done first.
Yeah.
So it's constantly being backburnered for these other things that are more lucrative in the short term. And they are fun to do. I mean, I did a radio play, a Polish radio play about a pedophile priest who lives in a world just after they've confirmed the simulation hypothesis. And is confronted with one of his previous victims and manages to use his only chance of survival is to use simulation theory to try and convince her to kill herself, because then she'll just respawn as a different character.
Yeah, it sounds like a Polish play.
Amazing.
Hey, Peter,
I'm doing a lot of stuff, but nothing hugely high profile except for I guess maybe the nonfiction stuff. I don't know.
well, Peter, did you hear that story about the Portuguese man of war on the east coast of Canada? Do you know
You're talking about the jellyfish, the colonial jellyfish, not the.
I read that story and I was thinking of you, and I'm thinking, apparently these things can have up to 15-meter tentacles.
Yeah.
And I just thought,
they're
can we
nasty little
zombify
guys.
those? What can we
They're
do
kind of
to
already
those?
zombified. They're not actually an individual. They're a colony.
Yeah.
Each one of those polyps is an individual that's just specialized
Right.
to doing different things. They're pretty science fictional. I had not heard that they were that Portuguese man o' wars were off
They're coming over.
coast.
Yeah.
I've seen lion's manes and yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the things, giant squid, as far as we know now, outmass human in terms of sheer biomass. There's more of giant squid on the planet than there are people in terms of kilometers. Jellyfish are expanding. Everything else is on the way out. We're all. But I mean, we should, Richard, I've told you all the stuff I'm not doing. Richard, answer the same question.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. I just literally today is a good day. Today I literally just turned in a novel.
Wow.
Yeah, literally. I finished it about a week ago. But I really stormed through the last half of it. So I told them, look, I want to go back and do a polish and clean up pass. So I've spent the last week doing that. As Peter just said, you never finish a novel, you only abandon it. But I've been through, I'm like, yeah, this is about as clean as I'm going to get it. If I keep going, I'm going to actually it's going to be detrimental. So yeah, that was then. And then because I insist on working off a Mac, everything has to be converted into Word files for PC, double spaced and all the rest of it. I did all of that, and the email to my editors in New York and London went out literally today, about 3 hours ago.
Congratulations.
So I'm very happy, Bunny, about that. I've got this. I still haven't got the sense of freedom that you get with that, because it hadn't dawned on me it's done. Because it's 6 years since anything of mine came out. The reason for that being that, well, one of the things was that with working with these guys at Gunzilla, I was absolutely flat out. I mean, that's the other thing about video game work, is it's very intensive. A lot of meetings, a lot of rewriting, a lot of iteration. So that sort of got in the way. I had some family issues as well with like family illnesses, lockdown, obviously. Plus the whole thing of trying to, Alter Carbon, the show, died after the second season, despite our best efforts. There was a lot of stuff going on there that I was trying to. So what with one thing another, anyway. Yeah, last book that was published of mine was 2018. I was writing a sequel to it, on and off, while all this other stuff was going on, and partway through, I think I may have said this when I was interviewed by you guys before, but I got 17 chapters in, and I suddenly woke up one morning. I have no fucking clue what this book is about, and which is weird, because it takes place on Mars, in the same place as the previous novel. It has the same protagonist. It has a number of secondary characters who were in the first novel. You'd think with all of that on my side, I'd be able to make a decent fist of what, but I couldn't, and I literally couldn't. I'm like, where's this going next? I don't know. And that's a bad sign. I mean, then that, and I realized, the truth is I'm just writing this because I'm supposed to. I need to put out a book. I figured a sequel will do. I like the scenarios, so I was just writing into that space, and so I threw the brakes on and went, oh, okay. Let's walked away from it. When I went back and looked at it, I was like, yeah, there's a book in here somewhere, but it's a real fucking mess. And at the same time, I'd had this image in my head for quite a long time, a more a fantastical than a science fictional image. And I wrote the scene that image was, and then I thought, oh, we might be able to go somewhere with this. And I wrote a couple of extra chapters as well, bedding in the scenario. And suddenly it's like, shit, there's definitely something here. So I got in touch with my editors, said, look, completely stalled out on the one I was supposed to be writing. I know it's been a long time. I've had this idea. Here are the 3 chapters I've written. I think you can see where I'm going with this. You tell me. And they were basically really great about, as my publishers have always been. I'm so lucky with Del Rey and in America and with Gallant in the UK. They said, well, yeah, in the end, you're going to have to write the one that you're feeling. We don't want you not writing the thing that is making the juices flow. So if that's what you want to do that. So I did, and I've got it done. It took me about 18 months, I suppose, start to finish. It was a real burn as well. I mean, it was once I decided where I was going with it, it was like, wow, I'm really enjoying this. And in a way that I wasn't with the previous one. So I think that kind of reinforces that it was the right decision. Burnt through it. It required a lot of research because it's set in 1923, sorry, but an alternative 1923. And I had to do a lot of reading, a lot of background reading and stuff. But it was all fantastic. I mean, everything I did, I'd be reading, and sometimes research is a real pain, you don't want to do it. But I would be researching and I'd be like, fuck me, that's really interesting. And then you go, right, I've got to find a way to get that into the flow of the book. And everything I found out about that post-war period was just fascinating and exciting and fresh for me, because it's not a period of history I know a lot about. And that all fed into the writing. So it's going to have this very in your face feel in terms of what the world is like, what's going on at that time. The First World War's over. It's been a shit show. The whole edifice of Victorian civilization has taken a real battering, morally as much as anything else. The sense that we're in control, guys, has just gone. And of course, this is a very analogous to what's going on now with Western civilization and culture, I think, where we seem to have reached a point where we're terrified that we are morally bankrupt, and we've lost the ability to ignore our moral bankruptcy, which I think is what all great civilizations have. Is they have the ability to go, no, we're where it's at. What about this? Fuck off, don't talk about that. There comes a point when I think with all cultures where they're unable to do that anymore, and that seems to be where we are, where we're unable to sort of have the courage of our convictions. And that was what was going on then. That from a period of history that believed that the world was in the grasp of an evolving mankind, science would take us there. The future was bright, the future was Wellesian, and that's all gone because suddenly, shit, millions of men murdered for what? A sense of total pointlessness to everything. The sense that things are falling apart, and and people fall back on superstition, religion. You've got this huge resurgence of like scientific spiritualism, and people desperately trying to contact their lost loved ones through seances and shit like that. And Arthur Conan Doyle writes an article in the Strand magazine defending the idea that fairies exist. All this shit is going on. Plus you've got a crashing economy, but this is before the 29 crash. This is after an initial spurt after the war, things start to fall apart. There's an undersupply of labor. You can't get people working. Again, sounds familiar, right? And the economy kind of stutters and stalls. And in Britain, it was bad because we owed America a ton of money for the war as well. And there is this kind of listlessness and a sense of what's the fucking point, guys? And then you've got this manic flapper culture going on as well, that everyone's just living for the moment, and it's all cocaine parties and starve yourself thin. I mean, absolutely fucking kicking. And so I spent a lot of time going through that and molding it into what, to the story that I wanted to tell. And yeah, it's been a real ride. I think and also it's been interesting because I think it allowed me to look at some ideas I had from an angle. Because one of the things, okay, complete switch of, I'm not changing the subject exactly, but a complete switch of angle, right? There's a book by a Canadian woman, Anne Michaels, who Peter, you probably have heard of. I think she's from Toronto, actually. No, Anne Michaels. She's really a poet rather than a novelist, but she has written a couple of novels. Beautiful, beautiful writing. And she wrote a book called Fugitive Pieces, which got an enormous, enormous amount of coverage. It's about the Holocaust, but it's not really about the Holocaust. That's the interesting thing. It's about people who survived the Holocaust in the sort of post-war period. And the stories it tells are not the stories of the camp. They're not the stories of the horror. But what happens is, in the course of the stories that she is telling, every now and then that horror pops up and bops you in the face. And I remember thinking at the time, yeah, the problem is that the Shoah, the Holocaust, it's become such a well-worn trope. It's actually quite hard to make fiction about that stick. You kind of see, and honestly, it's happening now. I mean, the number of books that come out, The Something of Auschwitz. It's become, you want to write a bestseller, just The Something of Auschwitz. The Poppy Seller of Auschwitz. And you get to this stage where you're just sort of, you see the book, you maybe don't even open it. You look at it, you go, oh yeah, death camps. Yeah, that was bad, wasn't it? Yeah. You're out. And what Fugitive Pieces does is it completely sidesteps that by telling these stories that aren't really about that. But every now and then, every, I don't know, 30, 40 pages, suddenly something from the Holocaust will pop up in your face like that. And you'll go, oh, get out. It's like almost like it's a moral jump scare almost. And I remember thinking at the time, you've got me back. You've got me interested in this again. You've got me to think hard about this horrific, thing. And I think, I'm not aiming for anything anywhere as grandiose as that, but I think what I've written has allowed me to look at some of the things I think that are going on now and look at them from an angle where people will be able to read and they'll suddenly go, oh, yeah, right. That's actually, yeah, So it feels fresh in a way that I think if I'd written another SF novel straight out the gate, wouldn't have done. And that feels really good.
That's great.
I'm intrigued by something you said at the very top of that monologue, which was that civilizations and empires collapse when they lose their sense of moral certainty.
Yeah.
Another way of putting that is that self-awareness equals doom.
We've heard that from you before, Peter.
And
yes,
not in the neurological sense, but the idea. I mean, what you basically seem. I mean, and it could be correlation rather than causation, but I find it an interesting juxtaposition that the moment you start to question yourself, the moment you start to question your own ethical and moral supremacy, if what you're saying is true, that's when the empire falls. What you're saying is that persistence of empire, the persistence of a stable societal structure, is dependent on being blind about yourself. It's basically success equals denial.
Yeah, or I think you've got to be prepared to. I mean, it's Bertrand Russell, isn't it? It's the heat death of the universe. Russell was apparently really upset about the heat death of the universe because his whole thing then was, oh Christ, so actually, what's the point? Because in an open-ended system, there's always a point, because whatever awful things might happen, you forge forward and maybe there's a better tomorrow. But his whole point was, if we're in a closed system and the universe just will eventually peter out, then shit, what is the point of all this? And he was horrified by that concept. I mean, I've never struggled with that, because for me, I always think of it in terms of a painting. It's like looking at a brilliant painting by Goya or Van Gogh or Dali and going, fucking hell, look, it only goes to the edges of the canvas. And if you scrape that paint off, it's just white behind. And you're like, well, yeah, but so I think things are worth themselves in that sense. But no, I do think that I think Western civilization is trying to negotiate a really difficult bottleneck here, and we're not doing ourselves any favors, because there is a way through, but the way through involves going, well, you know what, we're not fucking perfect, but we're the best game in town. And and I think that it's interesting because, again, I completely randomly, someone was telling me that there's a trailer out for Gladiator 2, which I haven't seen yet, but I struggle to think that it'll be any good, but regardless. But I thought one of the interesting things about Gladiator was, that film I'm ambivalent about. I did like it, but I felt that it was strongest at its start, and the more it went on, the less interested I was in it. I thought there was a lovely bit where or Marcus Aurelius comes out to see, what's his name, the protagonist. I can't remember his name now, Russell Crowe, and he's saying, all this brutality and slaughter, which of course we've seen because Ridley Scott has this opening battle scene. And, and he says to Russell Crowe, he says, are you not sick of it, or something like that? And Russell Crowe says, well, look, I've seen a lot of the world, and Rome is the light. And then he goes, yeah, but it's all gone corrupt back home, and it's fucked, and whatever. But I think it's an interesting thing, because I think that you need to have the ability to sort of say this, we are the light, even if it's a pretty dodgy light. And that seems to be what we lack, because to be honest, humans are not good at that. It's not easy to say, my tribe isn't the greatest. My tribe just happens to be the one that makes sense right now. Those are difficult things for, I think for people to take on emotionally. And what tends to happen is people just lose faith and they give up, and something more dynamic comes along and takes its place. I think China, what you see with China is a complete self-belief as a culture. They are, we are the primary civilization on Earth. We always were. We've just had a rough few centuries, and now we're coming back, and you're going to fucking do as we tell you. And there's no room for doubt within that. I mean, obviously there are going to be millions of Chinese who don't think like that, but the point is that as a culture, the way that the things are rigged at the moment, that's the outlook. And that's an outlook America had until, I guess, the Vietnam War. I maybe a bit after the Vietnam War, because the Reagan resurgence kind of pushed that into the shadows again. But yeah, I mean, you got to believe. If you don't believe. I mean, what was there was someone was criticizing the British journalist Robert Fisk, and said something like, he's a man who isn't even able to take his own side in a fight. And that's the thing. When you are unable, when you've got this kind of thing that is, oh God, we're so corrupt, we're so terrible, and none of that has to not be true, but you have to say, yeah, but what are we stacking this against? And it's a nirvana fallacy, isn't it? Things would be so much better if this mythical thing happened. Like, yeah, but that mythical thing isn't happening, hasn't happened, probably won't happen. So here's what we've got to work with. And I think that it's difficult to hammer that into a faith, because faith obviously is unthinking. That's a much more rational approach to things. I hear quite a lot of interesting people talking about, the climate issue at the moment, and saying very constructive things like, yeah, things are bad, but we can do things. There are things we can do about this. It can be, we'll pay a price, but it can be dealt with. It can be resolved. There is a way forward.
I don't think anybody on the climate issue ever said that we couldn't fix it.
Well, no, but I
just don't think we're going to.
No. I mean, I think a couple of these people, I'm following them on Blue Sky at the moment. What they are saying is that the problem is you end up with a paralysis of will, because the news is bad, and so people just get used to the bad news and they go, oh well, fuck it, there's nothing I can do. And they're saying, well, no, that's not true. There are things that we can do, and things that we are doing. In fact, I mean, I can't remember what, there was a stat about how much renewable energy is being used in Denmark or somewhere, some country.
Costa Rica is good for that too. Yeah, no, the price of renewables has collapsed, which is a good thing. The amount of renewables that we're using has increased exponentially. That's also a good thing. It hasn't made a fucking dent in the consumption and generation of fossil fuels.
No, not yet.
Like we're adding to our budget, but we're not cutting back where it's necessary. There has been a real cheerleading brigade set up against, in favor of renewables and so on. And I've seen some stats that suggest that just to electrify the UK power grid would absolutely turn the planet into a moonscape because of the mining of lithium and cobalt and molybdenum and all the other trace elements that are required.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Like and then of course this is something that the denialists and the status quo believers and so on will immediately trot out. They're not as stupid as Trump saying that wind farms kill whales or cause cancer. But there is a price to be paid. But the studies I've seen basically say, yeah, we're going to peak around the middle of the century. Then there will be a catastrophic collapse. We'll lose somewhere between half and 2/3 of the population by the end of the century. A lot is being made now. The Muscovites are making a lot now about how, we need more. We've got a fertility crisis, blah blah blah. And sperm counts are dropping, and blah blah blah. But what's going to cause most of that collapse is what's starting to happen already now. You're going to get environmental refugees. You're going to get water wars. You're going to get like 400 to 500 million people a year dying in anomalous heat events. You're going to get flooding. I mean, it was last year, the year before, that like a third of Pakistan was underwater.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of death. We're in for a very rough ride. We went into overshoot in the 1970s. The writing was pretty much on the wall after that point. The only reason society hasn't already collapsed is we've been maxing out the credit card by basically digging out last millennia, last aeon's energy. But in terms of a sustainable population, we passed that around 1976.
Right.
And at this point, I mean, I read a paper in Nature just within the past year that says the most optimistic scenario gives us only a 10% chance of avoiding massive societal collapse. And that's completely in line with other studies I've read from the University of Melbourne, from MIT. You're right in the sense that we could fix things, but we just fucking won't, because we're not wired to regard the future as a real thing.
No, I mean, we won't fix them until it's too late and this shit comes knocking on our door, basically. I mean, it's like they keep saying, I'm trying to think who wrote this, but again, she's a professor of climate science somewhere, and she was saying, people keep saying, we reconstructed after the Second World War. We have to see this as a war situation, and start applying those kind of rules. But the problem is we won't, because at the moment it doesn't feel like a war. So what will happen is things will slide. There will start to be, as you say, some serious joined up catastrophic events. And I think at that point, suddenly, then things will go to war footing or emergency crisis management footing, or whatever you want to call it. And then I think maybe the brakes will be applied. I don't know what will be done. But again, rather worryingly, yes, I do think there is this sense that, we're going to lose a lot of people.
This is just part one of a two-part conversation with Peter Watts and Richard Morgan. Yeah, they start getting into the heavy stuff now, so expect that in part two. Equally as entertaining. Until next time.